one of the things he always said, I visited him more than 30 times. I have hours of recorded conversations with him, and certain stories always come up. And one of the things he said all the time, 5 or 6 times at least, my father never said a bad word about Turks.
Interesting.
My father, he would make a point of that. My father never said a bad word about Turks. My father didn't hate anyone, right? He's lionized by Armenians and he's villainized by Turks. He was a human being and knows some people are evil and some people are good. And he did not prejudice. He did not like, no, you got to kill the Turks. It's like, no, that evil man that gave the Turks a bad reputation deserved to die. And so his father was a good moral character. He raised good kids. And that's, for me, this guy's really a hero. He's just a normal guy who was called, I'm convinced, by God to commit a divine act. And then he got to live out his dream of having a happy family.
Hello, my friends. Welcome to the Christ and Coffee podcast. My name is Dr. Haig Kurlopian, and today we're going to learn about the life of Soghomon Tehlirian. On March 15th, 1921, on the streets of Berlin, Tehlirian assassinated Talat Pasha, the last Grand Vizier of the Ottoman Empire and the mastermind behind the Armenian genocide. At his trial, Tehlirian famously said, "I have killed a man, but I'm not a murderer." The jury would find him not guilty. Tehlirian would live the rest of his life like a normal person. He reconnected with the love of his life, worked typical jobs, and even told his kids that he didn't hate Turks. Was this assassination an act of vigilante justice, or was it something more like him being a part of a Navy Team SEAL 6 killing Osama bin Laden? Or was it a divine call from God to bring justice to the 1.5 million Armenians who were systematically annihilated and uprooted from their indigenous lands? To explore this question and to learn more about the life of Soghomon Tehlirian, I have brought in Michael Gavlak, who has dedicated his life to tell Soghomon's story. He has the exclusive rights to Soghomon's memoir, and he's translating it into English and to release it soon to the public. Michael has also written a screenplay called Assassination, in which he hopes to share Soghomon's story to the big screen. So grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and enjoy this Christ and Coffee podcast. Michael, welcome to the Christ and Coffee podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me. Haig.
Hi with a G. Yeah, you know the difference, though. You could discern which part
Eastern
of
or
Armenia
Western,
I am
right?
from
Yes.
based on how I pronounce my name. It's a lose-lose because if you're a Western Armenian and your name is Haig with the G, H-A-I-G, everyone reads your name as Haig.
Oh, right.
And then if you're Eastern and you have the K sound, then they'll say, take a hike, which still happened to me. And I'm still traumatized by the bullies in kindergarten.
Your trauma is definitely coming out, right?
Yeah. So I don't take it personal, Michael.
Haig, thank you for having me.
But sometimes when I go to Starbucks, I'll be like, my name is Mike, because of when you pronounce your name out loud, I just will go with my Mike as my alias because it's close to Haig.
Because when it's ready, they'll go Mike, and you'll hear the Ike, and it
exactly.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, and totally. Sometimes I go with Ike too every now and then.
I have several Armenian friends. Like, my name's Vic. No, it's Vahe. Oh, okay. And let's see, Sam, or what is it? Cebu is. There's all these different English names that kind of pair with different Armenian names. Like, they just pick that because you Americans, you white people don't get it. You can't pronounce our names. Okay. Before you ask me a question, I have to go on a bit of a tangent.
Go for it. That's what this is all therapy for everyone.
All right, good. Well, so Soghomon, right? Soghomon Tehlirian, or Soghomon Tehlirian, right? So I come across this story of this hero, and I meet his family, and I meet his son, and I go to his son, and I go, well, I want to tell your father's story. And he says, okay, fine. It's been told so many times, and I'm like, well. He wrote his personal account, and it's never been translated into English, so it hasn't been told. And I said, so we're gonna tell his story to the English-speaking world, but I think maybe I might transliterate Soghomon to Solomon. And he goes, why would you do that? And that's all he had to say. I'm like, why would I do that? We lazy Westerners don't need everything adapted and adopted into our way of doing things.
I mean, I see the value in Solomon,
Yeah.
Better Call Saul. Like it makes it's easier to promote it. I mean,
Don't cave.
The R sound is very difficult. The A sound is one thing, but the R.
For you white people, English speakers out there listening, don't say Solomon. But if Sogh is the G is too difficult, just put a G. Soghomon. It's closer to the original. Soghomon.
Okay. Yeah. Solomon. So, okay, you're not Armenian.
Well, as far as I can tell, I haven't had my 23andMe done, so it's possible.
You never know.
Armenians are everywhere in the world, dude.
True, especially because of this genocide.
Yeah.
You don't know how many Turks have. When I was the pastor in New York City, like every couple of months, a Turkish person would do a 23andMe, and they'd be like, "I'm a quarter Armenian," and they would show up to the church, and it'd be very interesting conversations emerging because of that, because of this. It's all connected to the story you want to tell.
Right.
So. How did you, first of all, get connected to the story of Soghomon Tehlirian?
2017, I work, my day job is I'm a editor for TV, for gossip news. And if you work in the entertainment industry, whether it's in movies or TV, you're always looking for a job, right? If you're on a movie, the movie may last, depending on what your position is, may last you 2 years, 3 years. The movie's done. You got to find another job. Maybe you're with a crew that finds another job, but you're always kind of looking for a job. So I was in one of those transitions where I was a freelancer on a show that got canceled, and I had about 4 months to pound the pavement, network with my community of fellow editors and industry professionals. But being a Christian, working in the entertainment industry, of a long story, we don't need to go into it, but I didn't get my foot in the door until I was 35. I had previous careers. I was 35 starting at the bottom, but I developed a network of friends and coworkers in the industry, and God opened the door to get me into the industry at the age of 35. Fast forward, I was in my mid to late 40s in 2017. And okay, God, you got me here. You got me into a great job. I'm a union editor. That's kind of like the goal of anybody that is working in the industry that's not, above the line, that makes a lot of money. You're just kind of a working stiff. Getting in the union is one of those milestones. Like, God, you brought me here. You got me in the union. But am I here to work for somebody else, to tell other people's stories? Am I here to tell someone else's story? Or is there something more important that you brought me here for? That was the sincere prayer. And I fasted. I did a 3-day fast in August of 2017. My out date at the show was in September. And long story short, about a month after that fast, it was late September. I was pitching ideas to this guy. I'm a writer as well. I've developed my ability to, screenwrite, and I had a movie script and a TV pilot script. And I'm like looking for potential investors. And this guy said, he wasn't interested in my projects, but he said, I don't know if this is true, but my friends growing up told me that Armenia was the first Christian nation. Mm-hmm. And that caught my attention. I became a Christian when I was 18 years old. And in decades, that concept had never even crossed my mind. The first Christian nation. That's a milestone. That's like a landmark in history. And I would say, as a believing Christian, if Armenia was the first Christian nation, God had that planned from before creation. That was something God intended to happen. So the Armenia is special. Like all of that, I didn't extrapolate it out in that moment, but it hit me. And then he said, I think there's a hero story from the Armenian genocide. Now, this meeting was in a building in Glendale, and my gym was the 24-hour fitness or whatever in Glendale. So I'd been in Glendale. This is 2017, 2 years after the centennial. I saw the flags. Even after seeing the flags on the cars and the centennial commemoration, I still couldn't have told you when it happened, where it happened, the details of it. this kind of ambiguous thing, Armenian genocide. So this guy is telling me, I think there's a hero from the Armenian genocide. You should work on an Armenian genocide movie or look into it. I think there's a hero like an Armenian Geronimo, like a hero of his people, a universal, unilateral hero among his population. So I leave that meeting. The guy didn't bite on any of my ideas, but he pitched to me an idea. So in my mind, I'm like, all right, I got to find a job. But then I'm thinking, well, if I look into this, maybe it'll go somewhere. I get to my car, and before I go to my next destination, I pick up my phone just to check headlines. And I'm not kidding. The first words, it was a news feed. I was checking my news feed first. Literally the first article in the news feed, first words of the title of the article were Armenian genocide movie, trying to find advertisement or whatever. It was a documentary that had just come out. Montel Williams and Dean Cain did a documentary called Architects of Denial.
That's right.
In 2017. And this was like the week it was being released. And the article was about trying to advertise at the Americana in Glendale. And because it's a political issue, they were like, oh, you can't advertise here. Of all places to advertise an Armenian genocide movie, Glendale was having trouble with the advertising. So that's what the article was about. Forget that. I had just heard the phrase Armenian genocide movie for the first time in a meeting. And now I'm looking at it, seeing it with my eyes for the first time. It went from the ear hearing it to the eyes seeing it in a manner of about an hour. And if God is ever speaking to you, that's how he's going to do it. I mean, it was
through Montel Williams and Dean Cain.
And so in that moment, I'm like, okay. And it occurred to me the next day was my last day at the job. And one of my favorite coworkers, a producer, is Armenian. And I texted her. I'm like, you're Armenian, right? Tell me. And so the next day at work, she takes me on Wikipedia, and she's just giving me, she pulls up a picture, and it's 30 guys in bandolero bullet belts and rifles. And she's like, these are my people. She's ARF. And I'm like, here's 30 Armenian Geronimos in one picture. I'm like, there is a story here. And so long story short, I started digging, trying to find a hero story. To do a successful project in Hollywood, it has to have a happy ending.
Yeah.
It has to. Like, the hero's journey is a happy ending. And this is a genocide.
Right.
That's
not too many happy. It's still not resolved.
Still being denied.
It's still being denied.
Right?
Yeah.
Denialism is the problem, because denialism is a perpetuation of genocide, right?
It's the fact that you can't have a genocide documentary at the Americana in American Glendale, where 60% of the people are Armenian.
So where's the hero story? And I went through like Komitas and the defense of Van, right? The defense of Van is this heroic story. The Armenians in Van hold off the Turkish assault, but then they have to retreat and abandon Van. It's like, where's the happy ending? And then I come across just this one entry in Wikipedia: Talat Pasha assassinated by Soghomon Tehlirian, and he's acquitted on June 3rd, 1921. That line changed my life. That line, like, wait, the Hitler of World War I was assassinated by the counterpart to a Jewish kid escaping the Jewish Holocaust, like an Armenian kid escaping the Armenian Holocaust, tracks down the Hitler of World War I, shoots him dead in public, drops his gun, surrenders to police, and is acquitted. And that leads to the coining of the term genocide by Raphael Lemkin, who was a law student at the time, who was tracking this case and saying, how could that guy kill 1.5 million or 2 million if it's, the Christians? It was 1.5 million Armenians, 2 million Christians. How could that guy kill 2 million people and think that that's right? And Raphael Lemkin's law professor said, well, think of it this way. A farmer owns chickens or pigs, and it's his prerogative to butcher them if he wants to. And Raphael Lemkin was so shocked by that answer. 20 years later, when he saw his own people being massacred by another genocidal maniac, he reflected on that court case and said, we've got to coin a term so that people understand it. Soghomon Tehlirian's pulling of the trigger led to the coining of the term genocide. That's the etymology of the word genocide, that everybody knows the word genocide. Nobody knows where it came from. And this is one of those historic moments. It's also referred to as the verdict of in Soghomon's trial is referred to as the birth of international law. It's a significant moment in the recognition that we need international law, and it's the precursor to the Nuremberg trials. If Soghomon hadn't done what he did, there would have been no structure to build to try the Nazis. Right. So
Yeah. So
that's a long answer for your.
All right. Now let's spend some time unpacking it. I mean, I think most listeners would probably track most of that, but just to kind of now you got the whole picture, the significance of this. I mean, you hear the word genocide be thrown around. You hear the word Hitler be thrown around for like just cheap philosophical ideas. But what you're actually saying is there would be no Holocaust if there was no Talat Pasha. There would be no Hitler if there was no Talat Pasha. And the fact that this Hitler figure was about to survive and escape the Holocaust or the Armenian genocide, like he was going to be a free man in Germany, of course, Germany. So like, let's talk about the Hitler of World War I, Talat Pasha. Who was he? What was he doing? You mentioned the chicken comment. Like, what unpack that a bit.
So, first, let's talk about the Hitler comparison. Now, my historian friends, because I've been working with literally like, well, I'm not going to say the name of the university yet, right? There'll come a time when it all goes public, and I'll make sure I get approval from all the brand names that are associated with what I'm working on. But I'm working with a Turkish historian and an Armenian historian, and the Turkish historian is the advisor to the Armenian historian, and this Armenian historian is in the last half of his PhD dissertation. He's already taught a class at his university on this subject. In fact, the memoir of Soghomon Tehlirian was required reading in that class for the first time this past April. So my historians wince and cringe when I use the phrase "the Hitler of World War I" to refer to Talat.
Okay, that's good.
Right? They're like, oh, ooh. But the fact of the matter is, there's no other shorthand way to communicate the parallels.
Okay, let's not say that, but let's just say he was an inspiration.
Well, I'm going to keep calling him the Hitler.
Okay.
I'm a word guy. I'm a media guy. I'm a word guy, and that's because it's shocking to the historians. I know I'm onto something, right?
Yeah.
When they wince at it, I'm like, okay, that's what I'm using.
Okay, because it seems like it's in general, when you're in a philosophical argument, when you throw in the Hitler card, most people, when they're having the debate, would have that wince. But this is the inspiration to the Holocaust here. This is like that's a direct link. Okay, go ahead. Do the comparison.
It's the most direct link you're ever going to find. So digging into this, and I'll give you three connections, direct connections to Hitler. The first one, the one that's most commonly known among historians, is on September 9th, 1939, on the eve of the invasion of the Warsaw Ghetto, right? On the eve of the invasion, the Nazis invading Poland and butchering Jews. Hitler gave a speech, two separate speeches. He had to travel from the morning to the evening to get to the other camp, but he was addressing his speech to the SS commanders, and it was two separate places. So he gave the same speech, one in the morning, one in the evening. And at the end of his speech, he concludes essentially summarizing, paraphrasing and summarizing. He said, don't worry how you guys will be viewed in history as you butcher women and children. No one, after all, remembers the Armenians. Very matter-of-fact statement.
Yeah, you see that statement in the Holocaust Museum at the end.
Yes. Yeah. And so he's telling them, some of the things you're called upon to do right now are horrific and unimaginable to some of you. Others of you are probably relishing it. But don't worry how you'll be viewed in history. If you're thinking about, people are going to think we're monsters, no one remembers the Armenians. No one will remember the Jews. That's what he was saying to them. You'll get away with it. I have a proof of concept. I know somebody who did it and got away with it. Talat Pasha. He didn't use the name Talat, but he's using the achievement of Talat. No one at that date in 1939 around the world remembered what happened to the Armenians. And so that's the first point of connection. Hitler was using Talat as his inspiration. I can do this because it's been done before. I have a proof of concept. I'm even going to copy almost everything he did. The next connection is in 1943, at the height of World War II. Since Talat was assassinated in Berlin, Talat was interred in a cemetery in Berlin. Hitler disinters Talat's remains in an honorific ceremony and puts them on a train, which I envision with swastikas burnt on the side, and sends Talat's remains back to his home country to be buried where he should be buried. Right? This is a kind of an entreaty or a petition to the Turks to join us in the war in this last ditch effort. He's using a hero of the Turks and his own hero to appeal in a desperate, I don't know how desperate it was. I don't know the details of that, but it's a fact that Hitler and the Nazis disinterred Talat's remains and sent them home in an honorific ceremony. So that's connection number 2. Connection number 3 is the most shocking, and when I came across it, the most exciting for me to discover. In 1921, rewind, during the Armenian genocide in Erzurum province, there was a German consul because the Ottomans and the Germans were allies and the Germans were a superior military power. So they sent their military attaches all throughout the Ottoman Empire to kind of oversee operations. And there was the man who was appointed to Erzurum province was a man named Max von Scheubner-Richter. Max was called to testify in the Soghomon Tehlirian trial on the side of the defense. Max was a German military officer that witnessed Muslim Ottomans massacring Christian Armenians. And he was shocked by it, and he would report back to the Turks, the Ottomans, they're lying to you. The Armenians are not rising up. The Armenians are not rebelling. They're being butchered mercilessly. That was Max von Scheubner-Richter, a German military consul. So he's called upon to testify in the defense of Soghomon Tehlirian. He wasn't needed. There's a long list of witnesses. They never actually brought him to the stand. Max von Scheubner-Richter in 1923, so 2 years after the trial, Max von Scheubner-Richter was a part of the beer hall push where Hitler made his first stand and rise to prominence. Max von Scheubner-Richter took a bullet for Hitler. He was linked arm in arm with Hitler when the police were trying to break up the push. They linked arm in arm, fired on the the resistance with Hitler and his group. And Max, being best friends with Adolf Hitler, took a bullet for him. That's in history. The historians that I'm talking to say that when Max was in Berlin, in the courtroom, when Soghomon Tehlirian's trial was going on, he was in the courtroom. He didn't live in Berlin. He was staying in a hotel with Hitler while they were raising funds to launch the magazine that would launch the Nazi Party. Right? The magazine would be like the website or the equivalent of the news outlet to draw people in. This is what we believe. This is what we stand for. And they were raising funds to launch the magazine that launched the Nazi Party. Max von Scheubner-Richter is mentioned in Mein Kampf as the most difficult thing Hitler ever went through. So
when he took the bullet for him?
Yeah, the guy who took the bullet for him. So what this means is that when Max was sitting in the courtroom listening to the testimony and reflecting on the things that he experienced, he would go back to his hotel room and they'd go to the pub or whatever and drink and talk, and he would relay to Hitler, this is how he did it. This is how this guy butchered all these people. It's a connection to where Hitler literally got the ideas that 25 years later he would implement himself. It's like spine-tingling and crazy that nobody knows this story, yet the historians are feeding this to me. I'm like, okay. So that's why I refer to him as the Hitler of World War I.
There's a correlation, not a causation, as they would say.
Right.
But a direct link nonetheless, and innocent people being murdered and brutally genocided. But there's no sugarcoating this. This was so horrific that Raphael Lemkin had to coin this term genocide because of what happened. 1.5 million Armenians, Assyrians, Greeks, systematically uprooted, annihilated. And there is no sense of justice, right? So let's talk about the Soghomon Tehlirian part. Who is he? Where was he born? How did he end up surviving this genocide? Ended up putting a bullet through this Ottoman butcher? Okay,
so people who know this story, it's a shrinking group. There's almost nobody outside of Armenians who know this story. Some historians are aware of it, but there's a fading generation of Armenians who know this story. And I'll flash this again. So first, let me tell you what this is. This is Soghomon's memoir. Because he was acquitted in this trial, spoiler alert, because he was acquitted, he lived to tell the story. So he ended up writing the whole thing, and a lot of people their familiarity with Soghomon kind of begins and ends with either the court transcript or a book that Eric Bogosian put out in 2015 or 2016. I think it was 2015. I think he got it out in time. It's called Operation Nemesis.
Yeah, that's how I got introduced to this whole story. And I'm an Armenian, grew up in it, and I kind of had hintering of it, but I didn't know the depth of it until I read that book.
Yeah. So I would recommend Operation Nemesis. It's a really easy read, a good overview. If you just want to get a really good idea, and it's not a perfect book, but what book is perfect? And Bogosian's not a historian, but he has most of his details right. But this had never been translated.
That's his actual memoir.
This is Soghomon's memoir. He got, I don't know how many, but a bunch of them printed, and then it got another edition 3 years later. So 1953 was the first edition, 1956 was the second edition, and then I believe Armenia in the 91, like the official state of Armenia re-released it, another edition, but it's Soghomon's words. Had never been translated into English in 2017 when I came to the story. When I came to Soghomon's son, I'm like, I want to tell your father's story, but the hero, I can't read it, so I want to tell it. I want to get it translated. I want to tell it to the English-speaking world. So who is Soghomon Tehlirian? His family, well, first of all, his mother's father was a Protestant minister, Protestant preacher. So he was raised in an evangelical Christian home in Armenia, in Erzurum province, specifically Erzincan. He was born in Bagadic. I think that's how it's pronounced. Bagadic or Bagadic.
Fast and confidently.
Bagadic.
Yeah.
And so he was born there, a village outside of Erzincan. And then when he was about 7 years old, they moved into Erzincan, city of, I think 30 to 40,000 people at the time. And it was 50-50 Armenian and Turk, and some Kurds as well. But it was one of those cities that was very, very predominantly Armenian. And he had 3 older brothers, and his father left the country in 1890 something to get a job in Serbia, what's today's Serbia, and send money back home. And then as his older brothers come of age, they would go and join him over there. So Soghomon was the youngest of 4 boys. 2 of his brothers were with his father and uncle in Serbia, and one of his brothers was going to medical school in like the American University in Beirut or somewhere. So Soghomon was the youngest, last one at home, and his mother says, "It's your time. If you're 17 years old, when you turn 18, you get conscripted into the Ottoman military, and then pretty much die in a work camp in the Ottoman military." And she's like, "It's your turn to leave." And so she sends him away, and he's a mama's boy, right? It's like
He's the youngest son.
He's the youngest son. He's 4 years younger than his next older brother. He's got all of his cousins and nieces and his brother's wives, his brother's wives. And there were 85 total family members in Soghomon Tehlirian's family, and 80 of them were massacred. His father, 2 of his brothers, himself, and then an uncle. And then, jumping ahead a little bit, he ends up finding one of his nieces that had been sold into a harem.
Oh, wow.
So he went to rescue orphans, and one of them happened to be one of his relatives. So 79 of his family members were massacred.
So how was he able to escape the massacres? Was he in Serbia, or where was he fighting for the Ottomans? Well, where was he? How did he escape?
Yes, yes, and yes.
Okay.
It's interesting because in the court transcript or in the trial, there's fabrications. There's overt lies in the testimony to sympathize or, an appeal to the jury. There's no Google to fact check any of this. So he testified in court that he was there. He witnessed it, that he was left in a pile of dead bodies and escaped and was rescued by some Kurds and then went into Persia, and that's how he got out. And some people who've only read the court transcript believe that. They believe that. But even at the time, most people then knew. What happened was his mother sends him to Serbia to work at the coffee. It's not a coffee shop, but a little store that his father was running.
And coffee shop, like a.
It wasn't a coffee shop, but they provided coffee.
All right.
And other things, but like
Armenians and coffee. Okay,
Yeah.
I didn't know there was this link here too. Okay.
Well, fast forward, Soghomon followed in his father's footsteps and ran a little store in Belgrade. And he had a thing on the side of his car that said King's Coffee, because he was officially delivering coffee to the king. Like he would take all the, your month's supply and drive to the king's palace. So That's Soghomon in his life after all of this. But when the war broke out, he was 17, he was 18 years old. Gavrilo Princip was 19 when he assassinated Archduke Franz Ferdinand, about 100 miles from where Soghomon was, right? It's Sarajevo, I think is the location. So it's this bookending. You have this radicalized, the Black Hand, member of the Black Hand, Gavrilo Princip, and here you have Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the dictator coming, and he gets assassinated. One thing leads to another. People think it's going to be the third Balkan War, right? Westerners, we think there's World War I, World War II, then there was Korea and Vietnam. It's like over there's war. And
but this moment is where I learned growing up, this was the start of World War I.
That's it. And at the time, they were thinking it's just going to blow over, be another short war, because the Second Balkan War was like 2 months long or something. Yeah. It's like, okay, these hostilities. It escalates. All the world powers get involved. So Soghomon Tehlirian starts this memoir with him in Serbia, talking about the assassination and the beginning of the war. And then word gets around to all the Armenian communities in the diaspora of the time, right? There was already a diaspora because of the Hamidian massacres. And so they're looking for volunteers. The Armenians from around the world, from the United States, from all over, find out, and they all make their way to Tbilisi, Georgia, where General Andronik is rallying the troops, and there were 1,400 Armenian volunteers who were stationed at the front lines along the Russian front. World War I, there's the Western Front and the other theaters of war, and most of us hear about that. But the far Eastern Front, it's Russia and the Ottoman Empire, the Russian Empire and the Ottoman Empire. I go on all these tangents.
Yeah. But let's say, so he's away in that combat zone when his 79 family members get butchered?
Well, it's the fall of 1914. He's at boot camp in Tbilisi, and he actually, side story, amazing side story. He meets this beautiful young Armenian girl from his own region. Like, her father owns a little shop, and it's like love at first sight. And she's too young for him. He's 18 and she's barely a teen, and they just kind of see each other across the table. And he describes in the memoir leaving that moment and like, is it possible that two souls can be bound together? He was a poet. He loved poetry, etc. And so that happens, but he's going to the front line the next day. Like, after that, she's like, so we're friends now. He's like, well, I got to go. I'm leaving tomorrow. So he goes to the front line, and they broke up the Armenian volunteers into 5 different platoons or battalions or whatever, and put them at the front of all the different fronts where the Russian army was. So it's this huge Russian army with a little Armenian contingent in front. And Soghomon was stationed in it's northern Iran today, in between Lake Urfa and Lake Van. Like, if you look at the map, there's 3 lakes. There's Lake Sevan, Lake Van, and then there's another one that's Lake Urfa or something. I don't remember the name of it. But right in that region, they're pushing into the Ottoman Empire, and the Armenians it's their territory. They know this land, and they advance faster than the Russians expected, and the Turks are falling back. What ends up happening is, because the Turks fall back rapidly, they massacre every villager in every village in the retreat. And so as the Armenians are advancing, they come across these villages and they start seeing the fresh handiwork of the enemy. They're butchering everyone.
So in the timeline, Soghomon is in Etchmiadzin. There is this kind of retreat, kind of figuring out what to do next. What does he end up doing?
So Soghomon, despondent, he had hoped that he would get to his family, to at least, his hometown where he grew up, the place he wanted to live his whole life. His only objective was to find a girl, settle down, have kids, and raise them in his ancestral homeland. Like, thousands of years they've lived here, and that's all he ever wanted. And now it was all wiped out, completely removed from him. And so his instincts are to rescue the remnant, and it's harrowing and amazing the way, he describes just the absolute destitution. And keep in mind, the last adults that these young orphans saw were Turks or Kurds butchering their loved ones, right? These are kids fleeing to the hills, right? Their mothers or siblings are like, go, run, don't look back, don't. And so he wants to see if there's any remnant of his family. He doesn't say that specifically, but that's the logical. It's like he wants to find out if any of his family survives. So the next thing to do is rescue the remnant of his own people, his own culture. And so Etchmiadzin was the cathedral was the kind of home base for the orphans. He even describes walking in and on the floor, 100 infants laid out.
Wow.
And there's not even enough hands to take care of the infants. Some of them are dying there on the floor of Etchmiadzin.
This is the oldest cathedral in the world.
The first Christian cathedral ever built. And I've been there. It's amazing. It's incredible.
And I can't imagine it just this house of kids not being able to attend to.
What does the Bible say about the little ones?
Yeah.
Right. And so it's so cinematic, right? It's like, it's hard to believe this is true, but it is. And it's going to, when it's properly depicted, it's going to resonate with people. People are going to, like Christians globally, are going to be like, I can't, like, I'm so glad I've learned this story.
So Soghomon is helping with the orphanages. He's helping the kids. He's gathering survivors in Etchmiadzin.
He's interviewing them. So there's a guy named Hamo is the nickname. I have the name. Some of the actual names are in my book, but he's like a reporter. So Soghomon and this reporter get a room in Etchmiadzin, and they bring the orphans in one at a time, day after day in and day out, and they're interviewing them. And this guy's documenting, how many family members did you have? Where did you live? When was the last time you saw them? You're just documenting as much detail to preserve these legacies as much as possible. And obviously, they're hearing some of the most horrific things from the mouths of babes. And Soghomon Tehlirian describes, he's listening to this one girl give her, her testimony of the last time she saw her brother and her father's and being thrown into the river, tied together, etc. And he describes it as being there. Like became so visceral and so cinematically, we'll just put him there, right in the middle. They have the women lined up here and the men lined up over there, and the men are tied and thrown in as the women watch, right? And it's like so visceral. And then he collapses. As the interview is happening, he collapses to the ground, and he describes coming to, and everybody's over him. Are you okay? And in that blackout, he has a vision of killing Talat. He had seen one picture of Talat when he was stationed in Van. A newspaper came out, and it was like literally right around April 24th, right? The newspaper came out, and there's a picture of Talat, and there was, that's the guy. So that image is burned in his brain. And then he passes out. And that's like trauma, stress. And I believe that's his first instance of, real post-traumatic stress. That's the clinical name that we give to it. But I'm convinced he's in Etchmiadzin rescuing orphans. God is on him. God is guiding him. I mean, he rescued Arshil Gorky. You know who Arshil Gorky is?
Famous artist? Yeah.
He was in Van. He was an orphan in Etchmiadzin. And I'm like, Soghomon Tehlirian was doing God's work rescuing these orphans. And I'm fully convinced that this was the moment God said, you are the one I have chosen to bring justice. That moment when he's listening to the interviews of the orphans and he passes out, call it what you want. Post-traumatic stress disorder, I believe, is people getting a glimpse that there's some threshold that's everywhere around us. Right? There's a threshold of reality. God exists. We exist within the heavenlies. Like as Christians, we're seated at the right hand of the throne of God right now with Christ, right? What does that mean? It means there's a threshold that we're all a part of and interacting with, and God sometimes communicates to us in special ways across that threshold.
Okay, so he has this collapse. He sees a vision, and this is kind of like the seed for him. Regardless of how you interpret this moment, this is the moment where he's like, I have a job to do.
In the hero's journey, right? The proper storytelling, this is that moment where he has a mission and a goal that is planted in him that changes him forever.
And it's in his memoir?
It's in his memoir.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, then, so what happens next?
So he's either right before this or right after that, he's actually appointed, he gets the title, Head Orphan Gatherer. And they stage a mission because the Russians still have outposts in the Ottoman Empire. They haven't fully retreated, and there's treaties being signed with Turkey, etc. And so they They plan a convoy to go as deep into the territory as possible, and they're going to Erzurum and Erzincan. So he gets on this convoy with his team. He's got a bunch of guys that are helping him, and some of the military carts where they'll bring the orphans and put them on the cart and send them back. So he's gathering orphans all the way in. They get all the way to his hometown, Erzincan. And it's so shocking for him. His home is now a Russian barracks, where the soldiers are sleeping, like this place that he'd grown up that has all these fond memories. He goes there and he passes out again.
Because he knows everyone's killed, like all his family is
everything gone. He knew is gone, and he passes out right there. And then he has a vivid. The first vision he had was more of this, general imagery of killing Talat. This one is very vivid. He describes a head rolling towards him on the ground and stopping at his feet, and he looks down, and it's his mother, and she looks at him and starts talking to him. She said, "Be quiet, follow me." And the head rolls and over to this bush. And then there's other bodies laying there. And it's his brother, his next oldest brother, who I believe came back from medical school and was massacred. So he had one brother that died.
Wow.
And then some other relatives. And so it's this very vivid vision that he has of those. He has conversations with his dead relatives.
And this is all in his memoirs.
It's all in his memoir. And
it's not the court trial. This is the memoir.
This is way before the trial. And that's a point I wanted to make. People that know the story know they know he's famous for killing Talat and being acquitted. That's the end of the story.
Yeah, but there's a build up to all
this lead up is just incredible. And the way I see it, this is one of the controversial things. Soghomon Tehlirian's memoir reads like the Old Testament, or reads like Scripture, right? It's like it comports with Scripture. He's a Christian. He's not like preachy or anything, but he knows the Lord's Prayer and he goes to church and things like that. But being communicated to by someone on the other side, God allowed that to happen in special cases in Scripture, and I'm like, okay, that lines up with Christendom. And
okay, so like, regardless of how you interpret this. Okay, it could be like epilepsy,
reel me back in.
It could be PTSD, it could be a vision. He has the moment at the orphanage in Etchmiadzin. He goes back home. He has another profound moment of a vision. So it's like just building upon this conviction.
Yeah.
It's not just like a revenge thing here. It's like a little bit, it's like a sense of, there's a sense of like a justice call here, right?
Absolutely.
So regardless of how he received it, there is a sense he has that like something needs to be done, right? So what happens next?
So while he's in Etchmiadzin, that's where he rescues his niece, right? So that's kind of a happy ending to this portion of the
really
story.
Dark.
They're out,
unimaginable period,
as orphan gatherers. I don't know if it's the Russians or just the Armenians had instituted one Ottoman gold piece per Armenian, right? When you go out and find them, they're slaves in Kurdish camps or harems, and every Armenian they find, they give them a gold piece and rescue. And his niece was rescued by one of them. So then they retreat. There's some incredible battle scenes, and in this one, in the retreat, he gets injured and then goes back to Tbilisi, but then they have to evacuate Tbilisi and they go into Russia further, and this is where he reconnects with the family of this girl that he fell in love with, and he has typhus, he has a shrapnel injury, and she literally nurses him back to health. It's one of these just like sweet, it's the calm, like you've had all this storm and now he's in a friendly place, an Armenian home, and a girl that he fell in love with already, and he's nursed back to health. And then once he's healthy, there's this tension, right? It's like this pure sexual tension in the story where, he is convinced that this is the girl that he's supposed to spend his life with, but he's got this burden upon him, this mantle of vengeance and justice, right? It's revenge. It's two sides of the same coin, right? Something must be done. Nothing's been done. And he battles with this the whole way.
So he has this moment to kind of settle in, live a safe life, and just, that's it. The past is the past.
Yep.
To settle with this girl of his dreams. And then he also has this crazy thing where he's like, I gotta kill this person that caused this disaster on my people. So what is it? How does he end up in Germany from here?
Try and get to it really quick. No, I know.
I know there's a lot of detail, but we'll hopefully...
I'm a detail guy, and forgive me for that.
No, it's great. But because hopefully there'll be a screenplay of this, and hopefully people will have access to the English translation of this memoirs. But we have an hour, so...
You're all right, right?
Yeah.
All right. Fast forward. He works his way to Istanbul. Following the news, he knows, Talat's been sentenced to death.
Yeah.
Talat escaped. I don't know when he learned these particular details, but his instincts are, Istanbul is the head of the government. That's where I'm going to find him. He leaves this girl behind. She doesn't know where he's going, why he's going. And he says to her as they're about to part ways, he's like, will you wait for me? Right? You're what I want, but I got to do this thing. And she puts her hands on her hips going, we'll see who waits for who. It's like literally one of those dramatic moments. He gets to Istanbul, finds out Talat has escaped. He learns a whole bunch of stuff from this one political activist woman that he meets there. He didn't even know about April 24th. He didn't know about the 250 Armenians rounded up and put on trains. One of his favorite poets, Daniel Verojan, was massacred in that, and that affected him.
Yeah.
And he found out there was an Armenian who gave Talat the list of 250, a collaborator in the government, an Armenian guy who gave Talat the list of 250 names, who was still living in Istanbul. Soghomon tracks him down, shoots him dead one night while he's at a dinner party through his, this is where in the hero's journey, he does the wrong thing for the right reason.
Let's not try to I know you're a screenwriter and all that, but I always want to get the facts down because I just want to get the basic sentiment of the story. So he goes back to Istanbul, and this is he has his first assassination. He ends up killing Talat Pasha and this first person who gave the list, right?
Well, he kills
an Armenian
informant. He was
the Benedict Arnold. He was the
Benedict Arnold. His name was Artin Magardician, and he's known as the informant.
Yeah,
So.
and he pretty much gave a list of 250 Armenian leaders because this is how the systematic annihilation happened. So April 24th, 1915 is the moment of the Armenian genocide because it was the moment where this list was given to the officials of Turkey. These are the main leaders. Get rid of them.
Cut off the head.
The rest will be easy. So
Exactly.
So it was an Armenian person who gave the list. So first person he assassinates is this person.
Yep.
How does he escape in Istanbul? That's crazy.
So he has a small network that he's networked with while he's there, and it's literally by successfully assassinating this guy. In a sense, it works against him. In the long run, it works in his favor. It works against him. It's like, now you have to hide. Now you have to run, right? People are on the lookout for whoever this was to bring justice to this murder, right? You killed this guy. So his main collaborator there had gone to France because the Treaty of Versailles this is about that time when the Treaty of Versailles is being signed, and there was an Armenian delegation that went. And so she had gone ahead and so he decides to follow the delegation with another group go. And so he kind of goes trying to find, he even meets with the patriarch of the Armenian Apostolic Church. I'm like, I want to kill Talat. Will you help me? And they're like, oh, we don't deal in that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And he met with him both in Istanbul, and then when he goes to Paris, the patriarch had gone to Paris as well. And he meets with him again. And so he's running into all these brick walls. So he ends up in Paris for over a year as a cobbler, right? This Armenian guy who had a shoe business took him under his wing and said, I'll give you a job. And he's just he's thinking of giving up on this mission of finding Talat. And then one day he gets a note from the Armenian consulate. Meet so-and-so at this cafe. He shows up and there's a girl there that looks like the girl, his political activist. It's like the sister of this activist that had come to Paris, but then went to the United States. She gives him a letter and it's like, there's a ticket for you. There's a ticket for you at the consulate to come to America. There's a group that is looking for your services. This is when he gets connected to Operation Nemesis. So the activist friend he had in Istanbul that went to Paris ahead of him, then went to the United States, somehow connects with Armin Garo, Shahan Nadali, Aron Sachaklian, the three masterminds of Operation Nemesis.
So what is Operation Nemesis?
Operation Nemesis is a covert let's call it a legislative. The Armenian Revolutionary Federation at the time was probably the only intact political structure that Armenia had. Right? They were a large political party, and they decided, we are going to raise money and hire assassins to bring justice since nobody else will. So it's the brainchild of Shahan Nadali. Armengaro was the kind of the public figure. He was one of the most famous Armenians. He was the U.S. ambassador, first Armenian ambassador to the United States. And our own Sachaklian was the financier. So they voted in their ninth annual Congress. It was like a line item, Operation Nemesis, raise money for this operation. And so...
And he joins this operation already assassinating the first guy. So
well,
it's kind of like his resume.
It's his resume, but more than that. And this is what I've discovered. So one of the things I'm finding, I am in art. I'm going to say this here. Don't edit this out. I am the foremost Soghomon Tehlirian expert on the planet. Not just the details that I've uncovered or worked with historians, but I know the family. I know his personal, all of that. One of the things that as a result, I'm correcting the record. Every academic material, every piece of academic material, whether it's a book or journal article that I read, have factual errors with good reason. And one of those factual errors that I come across is that Soghomon was a part of the ARF when he that he was appointed to assassinate the informant. Right? I've heard that over and over again in different places, that Soghomon was his first job with the ARF is the assassinate the informant. He did that completely independently. 9 months later, the ARF have this conference with this legislative item called Operation Nemesis. I'm convinced that Soghomon's success was the inspiration for Operation Nemesis. And then when they get the funds together and get the organization together, they're like, that guy is looking for Talat. Well, there's one assassin. They have a list of names that they want to assassinate. They need multiple assassins. Let's bring him in. So he gets recruited to Operation Nemesis.
And then when does the moment happen where he's in Germany and able to find this high-profile leader of the Ottomans? So how did Talat Pasha end up in Germany? He ran away after the...
Yes. So
he ran away after the war.
He was sentenced to death.
He was sentenced to death by who?
He was sentenced to death by the installed new government of the Ottoman Empire, right? The Allies prevail, they're dominant, and then there's a new government that's installed. And
so he was sentenced to death. So he ran from Turkey?
He was sentenced to death in absentia. He had already escaped. And the list of people that they sentenced to death, there was only one of them on the list that was still in the country, and they hung that guy. The rest of them, Enver and Jamal, the three heads, Enver, Jamal, and Talat, the three heads.
Left.
They split. One of them goes to Russia, St. Petersburg. Talat goes to Berlin. They kind of scatter. And Talat, in Berlin, he just changed his name and lived a normal life. He had a whole floor to a building, like 9 rooms in this building, a whole floor to himself. So there's a network of spies, in the West. I mean, the United States and England were very, they were very important in tracking this information down. They narrowed down where Talat was to Berlin or Geneva, and they bring Soghomon to the United States. He comes to New York. He couldn't believe it. At that time, the tallest building was 50 stories high. Yeah. But he goes to Boston. That's where Operation Nemesis or Watertown. And then they send him back. They've narrowed it down. They think he's in Berlin. They send him in Berlin. They haven't found out exactly where he is. But Soghomon goes there under the guise of being, trying to apply to be a student. And there's 5 or 6 other spies with him, and the handler is Shahan Nadali, right? One of the masterminds of Operation Nemesis. So Shahan Nadali is the man on the ground in Berlin, and Soghomon is, they stake out these different locations where they know the Turks frequent, and they just follow them. And one day they go to the train station because there's a thing going on in Rome, and we think all the dignitaries, there's a Turkish conference in Rome, and we think everybody who's significant here is going to go there. So they go to the train station, and there's this one guy that walks by that Soghomon he describes having this sense of foreboding that this guy, something about him, his presence is domineering, whatever, and everybody kind of deferring to him and referring to him as Pasha. And that guy doesn't get on the train. And Shahan Nadali got on the train because he was going to follow the guy, and then the other spies stayed in the train station. And the guy didn't get on the train, and Soghomon follows him back to the apartment where he lives, and he documents it. I think that's him. I think that's where he lives. They send it back up the chain of command to verify. They finally verify that is him. They move Soghomond's apartment into an apartment directly across the street. So Soghomon has binoculars. He just tracks the guy's movements. He disappears. He's like, where did he go? He's off. And then when he comes back, he finally gets the green light. We've definitively determined that's him. It's a go. Your next opportunity, go do it.
So he goes, shoots him in the public sphere, gets arrested, then is on trial, and he's acquitted. Can you explain how he got acquitted?
It's called jury nullification.
What does that mean?
Jury nullification is when you are presented with facts in a case that are unprecedented. There's no case law. There's no other example to follow. How did they rule in this case? Well, let's consider there was nothing like this. You've got a genocidal maniac who's the victim, right? A person responsible ultimately for the death of 2 million plus people. And you've got this kid that shoots him dead.
How old is he when he shoots him?
Soghomon, he was born he's 24. Yeah, he's 24 when he's arrested. When he shoots him, he's 24, and then he turns 25 when he's in jail. So
wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So okay. And then there's detailed course case people could read into it.
Yeah.
And there was a play about it. I think that's kind of that was like the first foretaste of this story being brought to a mass audience.
Yes. And there's all kinds of errors and legends and fable that have grown.
And then he ends up where after all this? He gets acquitted. How long does he spend in jail? Like you just during the
10
trial?
weeks.
10 weeks?
Yeah.
Okay. And then
March 15th, right? Ides of March was the day he shot him, and June 2nd and 3rd, the 2-day trial.
2-day trial.
Yeah.
And then he just lives in...
And then Albert Einstein won his first Nobel Prize about 6 months later, right? This is that period.
It's that period of time.
It's in Germany, like Albert Einstein, right? It's literally just crazy.
Okay, amazing. And then what happens after his acquittal?
So immediately after his acquittal, I'm not sure where he goes first, but he certainly goes back home and visits in Serbia, like the remnants of his father. And I think he may have reconnected with Anahid, the girl he fell in love with. He may have reconnected with her then. But he goes to Manchester, England with Grigoris Balakian. Armenian Golgotha is a book by, it's the memoirs of Grigoris Balakian, who was an Armenian apostolic bishop, a priest. And he was on the witness stand. He testified for him. So this is a religious authority, right, that has taken Soghomon under his wing. And they go to England for a few months. And then he goes to the United States with the ARF and goes on tour. The ARF, all the money that was raised, not just for the Operation Nemesis, but for his court defense, was raised by American Armenian Christian churches and organizations, right? I've seen a lot. I've been in the archives. I've seen the receipts. They were asking for money, nickels and dimes, right? And so they take him on a tour. I mean, people would kiss his finger because that's the finger that killed Talat. And backing up real quick, I came across the only Armenian that ever experienced justice from this event.
Yeah.
He's the only one out of 2 million people to actually experience justice. He looked Talat in the eyes and pulled the trigger, and Talat knew he was about to die, and he knew why he was about to die, and he dropped dead, and then 10 weeks later, not guilty. Soghomon Tehlirian experienced both sides of justice. The victim, or the perpetrator receiving his just desserts, and then the victim being set free, right? And so he's the only Armenian I know that I think can exist that actually experienced justice. So he goes on this tour. They set him up with a shop in Cleveland. Like, you'll never have to work another day in your life. Everybody's going to frequent your shop and buy stuff from you. Except the girl that he fell in love with couldn't get to the United States. So he decides he's going to leave the freedom of the United States and go. They got married in Marseille, France, and then moved to Belgrade or Valjevo. And he raised his family, and eventually under Nazis and then communism. And then they were in a refugee camp in Trieste, and then they were in like Casablanca, and then eventually in 1956 made it to the United States, to San Francisco. And he worked as a bookkeeper in the restaurant of George Mardikian, as a famous restaurant in the Bay Area. And he passed away in 1960 of an aneurysm at the age of 64.
64. Wow. And was he like, what was his life after the fact? Was he just like a regular?
He was a regular guy. And here's the thing. What is a hero? James Bond's not a hero. James Bond's larger than life, right? And that's a lot of people are trying to make Soghomon this larger than life. He was a normal guy like you and I. He just wanted to get married, have kids, and raise a family. And so once he accomplishes this task and is acquitted, he marries the girl of his dreams and has 2 sons and changes his name. They don't have to live under the legacy of Tehlirian the Great. They change their name. They know their dad did something, but his son became a famous violinist. Like this watch, oh my gosh, this watch belonged to his son. Soghomon Tehlirian's son's widow I became friends with Soghomon's younger son in 2017, and he just passed away in February of this year. And
how would he describe his dad?
One of the things he always said, I visited him more than 30 times. I have hours of recorded conversations with him, and certain stories always come up. And one of the things he said all the time, 5 or 6 times at least, my father never said a bad word about Turks.
Interesting.
My father, he would make a point of that. My father never said a bad word about Turks. My father didn't hate anyone, right? He's lionized by Armenians and he's villainized by Turks. He was a human being and knows some people are evil and some people are good. And he did not prejudice. He did not like, now you got to kill the Turks. It's like, no, that evil man that gave the Turks a bad reputation deserved to die. And so his father was a good moral character. He raised good kids. And that's, for me, this guy's really a hero. He's just a normal guy who was called, I'm convinced, by God to commit a divine act. And then he got to live out his dream of having a happy family.
Wow. All right, let's talk about this from an ethical point of view, because I guarantee you what you just said, some of our listeners are like, God will call people to kill or murder.
God will call people to kill.
According to you. Okay, so I'm someone who's against the death penalty.
Okay.
What are your thoughts on the death penalty?
Well, does a sovereign magistrate have a right? Does a sovereign magistrate, if there is such a thing as justice, for example, well, let's use Soghomon as the example. Talat Pasha was not, he was not like, glad I got away with it. No, he was like, the dust's going to settle. I'm going to go back and I'm going to rule and I'm going to do some more. He's a genocidal maniac. He's a politician, a diplomat, and a very charismatic, coercive guy. So he is meeting with diplomats. We have it on foreign diplomats. We have the record of he's negotiating. If I can bide my time, I'll return. I'm convinced the first president of Turkey would have been Talat, Mehmet Talat, not Ataturk, right? Because Ataturk was under Talat in rank, and so Soghomon Tehlirian, by assassinating Talat, stopped further genocide by stopping him. Ataturk did some of it as well.
Okay, so that's an argument, because like the famous Christian theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer, he's considered a martyr because he was part of a plot that almost killed Hitler to prevent further killing.
Yep.
So that's the argument you're using.
Yeah.
But the funny thing with Dietrich Bonhoeffer, he was imprisoned, and right before the Nazis lost, he was killed.
Yep.
And he's venerated as this great Christian theologian
who was ready to kill. Who was ready
to step in. And it's interesting, what would be Bonhoeffer's legacy if he actually was successful in that plot attempt?
Yeah.
So there's that. And then there's a lot here, because this is a moment of war, this is genocide, and there was no justice happening to this guy.
There was no such thing as international law.
There was no
right?
such thing.
Right? There's no such thing as international law. Genocidal maniacs deserve to die. Let me say that. Would Hitler have deserved the death penalty if he hadn't killed himself? Yes.
Okay. Right? I mean, you make a good point.
Right? I'm just going to say yes. Okay. You got to pick a side. I'm going with yes on that one. I don't know whoever's going to choose to argue against the death penalty to defend Hitler. That's up to you. But But I look at it from God's purview, or I try to look at it from God's point of view, and those scriptures. So vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. And that's used as an argument against a human killing another human. Who does God use to bring vengeance, right? And I look at Soghomon story as akin to the book of Judges, right? Well, the book of Judges, this oppressed people of God, there's somebody oppressing them. There's no organized structure. God raises up a person to go kill the leader of the enemy. There was not any justice. The Treaty of Versailles was horrible for the Armenians.
Yeah.
There was not going to be any justice. And because, here's the proof is in the pudding, as they say, or you'll know them by their fruits. Soghomon's actions led to international law. Is that an objective good, right? Is that an objective good?
Yeah.
The acquittal, international law, now we have a way to hold barbaric countries and legal systems accountable.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. So there is this aspect of all this to bring this legacy to actually have the terminology of genocide and to condemn it for what it is. Because it's hard to bring justice when the scale of the evil is just beyond a civil case here.
I have an important point to make, though. The trepidation that we have is, well, if you venerate Soghomon, if you lionize Soghomon, then you're encouraging every young Armenian to go kill a Turk, right? And many have done that in the name of Soghomon Tehlirian, as I'm learning. There have been plenty of people that have taken upon themselves to go kill some Turkish diplomat or something. What I'm saying is Soghomon's actions can never be replicated. They're a one-off, right? There was only one Moses, right? Only one person to write down the 10 Commandments. There's only one Joseph to deliver the people into Egypt and take, and preserve and rescue the Israelites. There are people appointed in history to do special things. Soghomon, he wasn't a vigilante. He didn't take it upon himself. He was literally following orders. That's why I bring up a sovereign magistrate. Sovereign magistrates have some authority that individual actors do not have. Soghomon was following orders, and he couldn't disclose that in the trial because political assassinations at the time in Germany was automatic death penalty. So you have to act like you were a vigilante. You have to act like you were a lone gunman, but there was a whole infrastructure. He was following orders of the remnants of the government of the fledgling nation of Armenia that was just barely trying to survive. And the ARF filled that function of an organization, an organized structure to bring justice. So if all of that were understood by the court, he could easily have said, was he acting on free will? Was he of his right mind? It doesn't matter. He was following orders. It wasn't him deciding. He was being obedient to a magistrate, right?
Yeah, so in many ways, he was a soldier, and then after this mission,
there's only one genocidal maniac, right? There's only one. Like, you can't just go pick a Turk or an enemy because you don't like him.
It's just like a soldier off to war. I defeated the enemy. Yeah. My mission is done. I'm gonna go home now. I don't have hatred towards the enemy.
Yeah.
And that's what his memoir is saying. So I think if you frame it more of viewing him as a soldier the whole time.
SEAL Team 6 is an example I use a lot, right? So what is SEAL Team 6? Regardless of what you think about Osama bin Laden, and if there were, like, he was a whatever. Let's say Osama bin Laden really was the bad guy and really did.
Yeah.
Yeah. I reserve, I've been deceived by my own government about a number of things, and I'm not going to side on here. I'm just going to use it as an example. It is the purview of a sovereign magistrate. Osama bin Laden was being harbored by an enemy nation.
Yeah.
Right. We're not going to use international law to get that guy because those guys won't abide by international law. So we have the authority to go bring justice on our own. And so SEAL Team 6 goes in, finds him. One guy ends up being the guy who pulled the trigger. That's the guy who's the counterpart to Soghomon Tehlirian. There were 5 or 6 spies in Berlin. Soghomon was appointed to pull the trigger. It's the exact same principle. SEAL Team 6, Operation Nemesis.
Got it. No, that's a good way to reframe it.
It's not vigilante justice. Don't think that Soghomon's your hero, so you're going to go emulate him. Nobody can ever emulate Soghomon Tehlirian. It's a one-off.
Yeah. So what is his legacy?
His legacy is justice is in God's hands.
Okay.
That's I am convinced that this is something God did. I'm convinced that Soghomon, as a son of the first Christian nation, he takes upon his shoulders 2 million martyrs, right? It's the Armenian Apostolic Church canonized 1.5 million Armenians, right? That were massacred, right? In the Armenian Apostolic denomination, they canonized the 1.5 million saints. You know, in evangelicalism, as Protestantism, we don't think of saints the same way. We're all saints in God's eyes. But if those 1.5 million massacred, those martyrs, are saints, one of those saints appeared to Soghomon Tehlirian, his mother, right? Appeared to him and told him to kill this guy. 6 years before it happened, one lone guy all by himself, how is he going to get to this world leader who's escaped and taken on an alias in a foreign country? It's impossible. It's miraculous. And that's, I look at the story of Joseph. He's a kid who has a dream of everybody bowing down to him. And then he gets thrown into prison. He gets thrown into a pit and then into prison. And then he's a slave. And then he has a vision. And then God brings it to pass. I can't really see it any other way. This was an unlikely thing, an impossible thing that happened, and the result was justice. Soghomon Tehlirian demonstrates that God's paying attention, even at all times.
Yeah, because a common critique people have is, where is God in the genocide? And there's a lot there. But thank you for your time. I know we could keep talking about the details.
I want to say one more thing.
Okay.
And then you can wrap. On this note, justice has two sides, as we mentioned before. The perpetrator must receive consequences, but the victims have to receive recompense. There has to be something for the victims. And in 100 years, there's been nothing.
Yeah.
So justice hasn't been served yet.
Right.
Half of justice has been served. Soghomon brought it. The other half of justice is telling this story of 1.5 million martyred Christians to the world so that the world recognizes what happened. That's the recompense. So, not to aggrandize myself, but I feel like I'm finishing, that the story came to me so that I could finish Soghomon's task by telling his story on a grand scale. So, my project, it's Project Justice LLC is the name of my IP co that owns the life story rights. So, justice.
Your passion, your heart for this story is very apparent, and it's always extra special when someone who's not Armenian is taking on the story of someone from a different group. So thank you for all that. Best of luck. So you're planning on turning this into a screenplay?
Well, it's already in screenplay format.
And you want
a little product placement thing.
Yeah. And the goal is to get it.
It's script format.
Because it's just telling the story leads to a natural excitement story where you said you had that hero's journey that we're referring to throughout the conversation. So, so thank you so much for your time.
AssassinSaint.com.
That's for the screenplay.
So there's a donate button there. Like, I've got a bunch of volunteers helping in a lot of capacities, but really there's a donate button there. You can cut this out if that's not something you guys talk about. You can actually purchase a book. Some of the books are almost ready. And then there's a newsletter sign up. I'm launching a newsletter, and there's a 5-minute video that gives some behind the scenes of what's going on.
Thank you so much.
AssassinSaint.com.
AssassinSaint.com. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to the end of the Christ and Coffee podcast. Have a great week, and remember to stay caffeinated, my friends. God bless you, and take care.